Mm-hmm.
So if you have a owner who is wanting to sell their home that is tenant occupied, and the tenant wants to purchase the home, and they know they've lived there for years, they know everything that's going on with the home, they know ins and outs, everything. Um, and so there's like no issues as far as like maintenance goes, because obviously as property management, that's our job to upkeep it.
Yep.
So could we then represent both of them and it be okay if there's no
Here would be
like
my question.
issues?
Here would be my question.
Uh-huh.
Why would you represent both of them?
Well, the reason why I was asking is because, like in that situation, the owner obviously wants to stay with us because we manage the property.
The owner's already your client, right?
Yeah, the owner is already our client.
Okay, so it's
The tenant,
natural that they would be your client in the sales
absolutely,
transaction.
absolutely. So the tenant wants to be with us just because they've been with us they've rented with us for over 7 years.
But be with you doesn't necessarily mean you have to represent them.
Right, because would they be considered a customer and not a client?
Correct.
Or
You don't
okay.
have to represent them. Can you help that tenant purchase the property as a seller's agent? And the
Mhm.
answer is absolutely.
Yeah.
You just say to the tenant now, because right now it's the same relationship you already have. Right now, you don't represent both the landlord and the tenant. You only represent who?
The landlord.
The landlord. Be the same way in the sales transaction. You would deal with the buyer, make the deal, tell them you represent the seller, move on with your life.
Okay.
And the seller will be the only one that has representation.
Okay. It's just really dirty. Okay.
I'm sorry?
It just seems really dirty that someone would go in without representation.
Well, but here's the
Like I don't.
thing. You have to look at it this way. Why would they want representation? Because they need what?
They need advice and to cover their grounds.
They can't get that in dual agency.
Yeah.
The first rule of dual agent. So if they really need advice, then they don't need dual agents. If they
Sure.
really need advice, they need an outside firm, and that's a different discussion.
Okay. So long story short, don't do dual agency ever.
Well, I wouldn't say ever because there will be times when it's unavoidable. There will
Okay.
absolutely be times. We're going to talk about some of those times when it's
Okay. Because
unavoidable, when it
I
happens.
just hear like negative about it, and I'm just like, okay, shut it down.
What I would say is don't do it when you have control. When you have
Okay.
control and you have the ability, like in your situation right there, you
Yeah.
have control. You have the ability to dictate whether or not that's going to be whether that's going to be dual agency or just straight up seller agency. And I
Okay.
would say whenever you have that choice, stay on one side. Stay on
But
one
but
side.
it's safe for us as if we're representing the seller to say, like, as of right now, since they are still just a tenant, we can sit there and say, we think it's best for you to find your own agent outside of our agency.
You could if you wanted to. You're not required to,
Right.
but you could.
Okay.
Absolutely. And if they really need advice, from their perspective, that's what they need is an outside firm
Yeah.
because that's the only way they're going to get the
Absolutely.
advice.
Okay.
Question, and
Thank
you
you.
already covered it and I've forgotten, but let's say Brittany did represent, or Brittany's firm represented both of these sales. Would the firm practically be paid twice?
Well, that's a lot of people think of it that way, but the way I would prefer you to think of it is they're just not having to share. Because remember, most firms go into a transaction expecting that they will probably have to share the commission with another firm. If another firm brings them a buyer, they're probably expecting to share the commission. So the advantage would be if there's not another firm, that there's no one to share it with.
Right. So could then, like, there's no way that the buyer could or the seller could know about this. This is another way that because of dual agency they could kind of get over, right? Like they could get more money.
Well, no, because the seller has to give their permission. You have
Right.
to have informed written consent. So you have to go to the seller before. So what Brittany would have to do is go to the seller and say, listen, the tenant is wanting to make an offer, and they also want us to represent them. Are you okay with us representing you and them? keeping in mind, once we do that, we can't give either one of you advice, and the seller would have to say yes to that, and the buyer would have to say yes to it.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I actually asked, like, not to keep this going, but I actually asked my my boss at the real estate office, like, what, obviously he couldn't tell me everything because of confidentiality, but he's like, we have decided that we can't represent the tenant in this transaction because the seller was not comfortable with it.
Right.
But like, I just needed to have that clarification because it just wasn't processed.
Right. And dual agency is all about the questions, and that, this is all about getting it right in your own mind. One of the biggest problems we face with dual agency is disclosure of information. Think about it. Normally with a client, if someone is your client, what do you tell them as far as things you know? What information do you tell them?
Everything.
You tell them everything.
Everything. I don't care what it is. If they're your client, you tell them everything, right? If you're representing the seller and you know that the buyer is willing to pay more, what do you sit on that information? Or do you tell the seller? What do you do?
Tell them.
If you represent the seller and you just happen to know the buyer is willing to pay more, you hear them.
You absolutely.
Yeah, you
Even
gonna tell
open
them.
house, and you
Tell
hear them
them.
walking out the front door going, I pay $50,000 more than the list price on this one. What do you do with that information?
Tell the
Ooh, you
seller.
gonna burn them down.
You burn them up. Not only can you use that information, but you're obligated to use
Yeah.
that information. You're forced to disclose that to your client. So, I love being on one side of the transaction, because I'm gonna tell you, if you don't want somebody to know it, don't tell me, because I'm gonna tell you. It ain't nothing. I'd like to talk too much. My grandfather used to say that the three best ways to communicate with people were telephone, telegraph, or tell Travis. Because if you did any one of those three, everybody was going to know. And so I don't work well with dual agency because I can't keep my mouth shut.
My God, you are Eastern North Carolina through and through.
But see, I don't have to do that when I'm in exclusive agency. In exclusive agency, I'm expected to tell everything I know.
That's
right. But in dual agency, I got to keep it all secret. Ooh, I can't say that. I can't say the buyer's willing to pay more money because the buyer's also our what?
client.
They're our client too. And so it puts you in these awkward situations where you might know things on both sides that would be really helpful as far as making the deal happen, and you can't use it. I don't trust myself in those situations. I always use this little hypothetical in class as an example. I said, I want you to imagine you have a listing, and when you sat down with the sellers, you were talking about what you wanted, what price they wanted to list for and everything, and they insist on 320. And that's a high number. Like, you tell them, like, listen, 300 is the best you're going to do. But you know how sellers are, and they all, like, their house is worth more money, and, and you just argue till you blue in the face. But you finally agree to list it at 320. And here's what they say to you. We know that number's a little bit high, and we would take 300, and we'd be happy with 300, but we just want to see what happens. There's nothing else on the market. Well, normally that information is fine because you're going to keep it confidential. They're your clients. So what if you know that they'll take 300? You're marketed at 320. A week later, a buyer comes along at an open house, and they don't have an agent, and you decide that you're going to be their dual agent. And you sign that buyer agency agreement. Now you're a dual agent, and they want to make an offer. And you tell them, now I can't give you any advice. I can't help you. And they say, well, how much you think we should offer? Well, I can't help you with that. You got to figure it out. And so they start talking their way through it right in front of you. And they say, well, it's kind of high. This is kind of overpriced. We know this neighborhood, and this is a little bit high. I mean, this is a nice house. We really love it, but we can't pay $320 for it. And they say, well, what do you want to offer? So, well, let's offer $280. And I say, okay, so you want to offer $280? That's what you want me to put on the offer? And they say, well, yeah. What do you think about that? And I'd say, I can't help you. I mean, I don't know. I can't help you. That's up to you. But whatever you want to submit as an offer, I'll submit it. And they say, well, listen, we would do 300, but let's just try 280 and see if it'll work. So now here's the situation. I got an offer from my buyer that I represent for 280. I'm presenting it to my seller that I represent, and they're listed at 320. What if the seller looks at that and goes, 280? People are crazy. I'm not taking 280 for our house. Now, what am I supposed to say? I can't give them advice, so what am I supposed to say?
Okay. Or ask
Okay,
what they want to
do
do.
you want to make a counter offer? Is there something else you want me to tell you? No, I don't want you to do anything. 280. These people wasting everybody's time. Don't even worry about that mess. We're just waiting to see. Now, here's the problem. In my little head up here, I know, because I've already heard them say, that the sellers will take 300 and the buyers will what?
Take 300.
Will pay 300. Now, I know the rules, and my little good angel is sitting over here on my shoulder and telling me, you can't tell them that. You're not supposed to tell them that. That's confidential information you're not supposed to use. I get all that. But the problem is I got a much bigger and louder bad angel on this shoulder over here. And he's gotten out a calculator, and he's figured out what a 6% commission on $300,000 is. And he's like, that's $18,000. And I'm like, but I think the good angel's like, but you can't use that information. And bad angel's like, $18,000. If you trust yourself in that situation, you're a better person than I am. I don't trust myself in that situation. That's why I don't like it. I try to keep myself out of that situation if I can, because it's uncomfortable for me. I like being in the situation of trying to fight for my fights. That's just me. And everybody has to make that personal decision. But do you all understand the rule about not being able to give advice when you're in dual agency? Because that's important. Everybody good with that? Now expand that rule to the whole firm. Think about your group from this morning. Think about your little group this morning. You had a broker in charge and you had a whole firm. What if one of you had the listing, but another one of you had the buyer? Would it be any different, or would that be exactly the same thing as far as the law is concerned? What do you think?
Exactly the same thing.
It'd be exactly the same thing as far as the law is concerned. Here's where that's going to get sticky. Let's just make up a little hypothetical here. Let's say that Deborah works for Starburst Realty as a buyer's agent. And she's got her best friend that she's known for 30 years as a buyer client right now. Well, the best friend didn't hire Deborah. Who did the best friend hire? Starburst Realty, right? But that's okay, because Deborah's happy there. She's been there. She's not going anywhere. It's all right. So Deborah's been showing her best friend of 30 years around. At the same firm, you've got Sarah, who has a listing. Now, the seller didn't hire Sarah. The seller also hired Starburst Realty. Does that make sense for everybody? And by the way, the seller is Sarah's mother, her mom. This is her mom's property. But Sarah's mom didn't hire Sarah. She hired Starburst Realty. Is everybody with me on that? Who does Sarah represent in the transaction?
Both of them.
Both of them. Who does Deborah represent in the transaction?
Both.
Both of them. Here's the thing. Has Deborah, who's working with her best friend, the buyer, has she ever met this seller?
Nope. Most likely no.
Does she know anything about him?
No.
I'm going to tell you even better one. If it's a big firm, not only does she not know anything about the seller, she probably doesn't even know Sarah. Even though they work for the same office, even though they're affiliated with the same bit, I bet they've never met each other. I bet they wouldn't know they work for the same office if they were standing right in front of each other. But the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says that's dual agency. So here's what's going to happen now. Deborah's best friend wants to see this house. And Deborah shows it to her and says, what do you think? And the best friend says, I love it. I want to make an offer. Deborah says, good, let's get busy with that. And then the best friend says, well, what should I offer on it? And Deborah said, well, I can't help you with that. And her friend laughs at her and said, no, be serious, Deborah. I'm serious. I want to buy this house. And Deborah said, well, I can't help you with that. And her best friend says, why? So, well, because I also represent this seller. And the best friend's going to go, you represent the seller. That wasn't your name on the sign. It was some other girl, some other lady up there on the sign. I wasn't your name up there. I would have noticed that. Plus, I know you just got your license. You ain't got no listings. I know that. What do you mean you represent the seller? Well, my firm represents the seller, and it's another agent in my firm. And because they have the listing, then I also have the listing. I also represent the seller. Do you know how skeptical even your best friend is going to get about you and your motives when you start explaining all that? Somebody's going to start looking at you and going, no, you full of it something. Now, you could be telling them exactly the truth, and they're going to be like, no, come on, Deborah. This don't make no sense. Isn't that how it's going to play out? And by the way, suppose they get the offer written up. Isn't Sarah going to have an even worse time on the other side? Because now who's she presenting the offer to?
Her mom.
Her mama. How's that going to go when mama says, well, Sarah, what should I do, honey? And
Can't help
Sarah
you.
has to say, Mom, I can't help you with this. What do you mean you can't help me? Well, I also represent the buyer. Who are they? Where do they work? What do you know about? Well, I don't know anything about them. I've never met them. How do you represent somebody you've never met? Well, it's somebody else in my office. And so wait a minute. You telling me you like somebody that you've never even met more than your own mama, and you won't even tell me what I'm supposed to do on this thing? Why did you take that class anyway?
It's something my mom would say.
Doesn't it sound like that's how it's going to go?
Yeah.
This is a crappy situation for everybody, but that's the way dual agency works in North Carolina. I hate it. I hate the way it works. I hate the way we define it, but it is the rules we have. It is the rules we have. And so it means neither Sarah nor Deborah can give advice to either one of those. Now, before I go on, I want to talk about why that's legal and why it still exists. Barbara asked a great question in the chat. She said, how would agents find out they're representing both clients in a firm when it's a big firm and they don't know the other agent? That's a great question. Barbara, most likely, even when you're showing anything, most agents in most firms are realtors. And so they're managing their showings through the MLS. One of the first things you see when you pull up an MLS listing of somebody is what a firm they're affiliated with and how much compensation they're offering. So the way she would know, or the way they would know, is when they look in the MLS at the other agent and they see whose listing they're showing, they would notice they're the same firm. It'd be like an alarm bell. Ding, 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 this is dual agency. I got to talk to my client. I got to ask them. I got to give their... Now, here's the interesting thing. When should Deborah have gotten permission, do you think, from her friend about this dual agency? When should she say to her friend, now, we can do that, we can work on this property, but you need to know now I also represent the seller, so I won't be able to give you any advice. When do you think that conversation needs to happen between Deborah and the buyer?
When she found out.
Before seeing the property, before even showing it?
Before the showing. Before you
Yes,
go
when
in the
she found
property.
out.
Don't take them in the property until you've already had that discussion. Have that discussion first and and does that discussion need to happen twice?
Yeah.
Deborah's got to have the discussion with the buyer. Meanwhile,
Sarah
Sarah's
has to
got to
have it
have a
with her
discussion
mom.
with who?
Her mama.
With her mama, the seller. Could either one of them say no, and that would kill the whole thing, prevent it from even being shown? Is everybody with me on that? If you're really with me on that, then you will understand the next thing I'm going to say. This right here is the reason why people agree to dual agency. Those of you that are in the Triangle or in Charlotte, what does the market look like right now? A bunch of houses to go look at if you want to go look at something, or is it crazy out there?
I have 3 in my neighborhood for sale.
Are they like been on the market for a long time? Or they just come on the market, or
Nope, they're selling fast.
they sell fast? So
Yep.
if
All
you're-
with multiple offers.
all multiple offers. So if you're a buyer, there's already not a heck of a lot to choose from. Can we agree with that?
Correct.
So here's how the conversation's really going to go between Deborah and her friend. Deborah's going to say to her friend, I can show you that property, but it's listed by my firm. So here's what you need to know. I don't know a thing about these sellers, but because it's listed by my firm, I can't give you any advice, and neither can the agent on the other side give any advice to the sellers. And her best friend, the buyer, is going to say, well, that sounds crappy. I don't want that. And Deborah's going to say, well, here's your choices. You tell me what you want to do. Either you want to see it and allow me to be a dual agent, or you don't want to see it at all. The reason those are the only two choices is that buyer already has a buyer agency agreement. They're locked in to their firm. The seller already has a listing agreement locking them into that firm. So if the buyer says, no, I don't agree to dual agency, then they're also saying, no, I will not look at that property. Same thing is true for the seller side. Sarah's going to have that conversation with her mom, and mom's going to say, what do you mean you're not going to be able to help me? And Sarah's going to say, Mom, I don't like that either. But here's the deal. This buyer really wants to see your house. If you say no, they're not going to be able to look at your house at all. So do you want them to see your house and maybe make an offer where I wouldn't be able to give you advice, or would you just rather not look at your house at all? When you put it that way to a buyer and a seller, you understand why they're much more likely to give their approval. Does that click for everybody? Because that's ultimately the choice they're making. And I'm not saying it's a good choice. There are no great answers. Once we get to dual agency, there are no great answers. There's only bad and worse from that point forward. That's dual agency. That's dual agency.
But
No advice, no guidance.
shouldn't you
I mean,
have
I would,
over dual agent
No sale.
way in the beginning when you were signing them up as a client?
Sheila, did you ask if I would normally go over it in the beginning when I'm signing them up as a client? Was that the question?
Yes.
So that depends, Sheila. My answer to that is it depends on the situation for me. Generally speaking, I do go over dual agency with sellers as soon as I list their property, as soon as I'm taking the listing. And here's the reason. I don't want to have to track the seller down. If we've got a buyer that wants to look at the property, I want to know right away, or am I wasting my time? Has this seller said no to dual agency, in which case there's no need to even have the conversation with the buyer? Or has the seller said yes to dual agency, in which case now we only need to have the conversation with the buyer? Does that make sense? That way, if I get the seller's permission up front, then we only need to have one conversation down the road.
Got it.
Now, I don't have the conversation in the beginning with buyers, and I'll tell you why, and it's a business decision. It's not a wrong thing. You can have this discussion with both of them up front and go ahead and get permission in advance. I find that the discussion of dual agency with buyers makes them distrustful of you. If you explain it in detail to them, it makes them distrustful. They start to not, so I don't present it to them, and I hope that it never comes up as an option. Luckily for me, I'm associated with a small enough firm that it hardly ever comes up as an option because it's my firm. It's just me and Seth and Leslie. That's it. And so dual agency almost never comes up as an issue for our buyers. So I don't discuss it in advance with my buyers. And 99 times out of 100, it never becomes an issue. So I never have to discuss it. If I were affiliated with a Keller Williams office that's got 150 people, I'd probably have a discussion about dual agency with everybody because the odds would be so high that it would come up.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So now that I've presented all of the nightmare problems that dual agency can present, I want to talk to you about the potential solution that could be coming your way. Because dual agency does present a problem, especially for big firms. If you go back to our example with Sarah and Deborah, the conversation just seems ridiculous. Deborah's having to try to explain to her best friend why she can't give her best friend advice. When the truth is, Deborah doesn't really know anything about that seller. Deborah doesn't know the listing agent. Couldn't Deborah, forget the rules for a second, couldn't Deborah just give advice to her buyer and it wouldn't harm the seller in any way, in the sense of she doesn't know anything about the seller that would harm them? Couldn't she just give advice to the buyer, theoretically? Forget the law. I'm just saying, theoretically, she doesn't know anything about the seller. It's not like she knows confidential information about the seller. She doesn't know anything that would harm him. So she just be giving generic advice. You know, I think the property's worth this. I think you should do this. Here's how you should structure your offer. She doesn't have specific harmful information for that transaction. Is that a fair statement? And in that same situation, Sarah doesn't have information that would specifically be harmful to the buyer. She doesn't know the buyer. She doesn't know the buyer's agent. She doesn't know anything. What if I told you there was a way in which the firm could be a dual agent, but the individual agents could be put on teams? What if I could just say to Deborah, do you want to just represent your friend, the buyer? What do you think her answer to that would be? Yeah. She would say, yeah. I would say, then do it. Just go work with the buyer and only the buyer and forget about the seller. What am I going to say to Sarah? Do you want to just represent your mom? You want to just represent your mom? You want to be able to give your mom advice? Then go do it and forget about the buyer. That's called designated dual agency. Now, there's a lot of people, and I'm one of them, who thinks that designated dual agency should be the way to go anyway. It should be the default. It's not. Dual agency is the default. You have to ask for designated dual agency. You have to go one step further, and you have to explain. And it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. But here's the beauty of it. Here's why it's better than dual agency. How many firms are involved in this transaction still?
One.
Just one. So there's no sharing of the commission. If that was the concern, then that concern's gone away. There's no sharing of the commission. The firm gets to keep all the commission. Does that satisfy that problem?
Yes.
We're all good with that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What's the biggest thing that the clients lose in dual agency? They don't get what?
Advice.
They get it back in designated dual agency. Deborah's going to be able to give advice to her best friend, the buyer. Sarah's going to be able to give advice to her mom, the seller, in designated dual agency.
Just because they're broken up into two teams.
That's exactly right. Because the BIC is essentially creating teams within the firm. Now, in most cases, it's teams of one. How many agents am I probably going to put on the buyer side?
One.
Probably just Deborah. And how many agents am I probably going to put on the seller side? Probably just one, just Sarah. Could I put 2 or 3 on each side? That's what I wanted to do as a broker in charge.
Yes.
Yeah, we can designate whoever or how many we want to. There's no limit on that. It is up to the broker in charge how they accomplish this. And what they're essentially going to do is create 2 teams within the firm. But now, here's where the rubber really meets the road, and this is where it gets important. There's a lot of benefits to designated dual agent, but there's a trade-off. There are rules. If you go into designated dual agency, I want you to look at this bullet point right here. Sarah and Deborah are going to have to treat each other as if they don't even work together, if they don't work at the same office. You can't do designated dual agency with 2 agents that are buddy-buddy in the same firm. If they go to lunch together 2 days a week, can they be designated dual agents opposite each other in a transaction?
No.
No, they're too close. They're too close. they know too much about each other's clients. If you're going to lunch together twice a week with somebody, are you talking about your clients most likely when you're sitting in there? Or do you come in there, whoa, the seller is driving me crazy. They are so overpriced and I just hate dealing. And that's, and you bounce ideas off of each other. And that's okay, because remember, if you work for the same firm, you both represent that seller. But it wouldn't be okay for one of those two people in that conversation to all of a sudden jump on the buyer's team. Because if they all of a sudden jump on the buyer's team, what would they say to the buyer first thing? Well, the listing agent thinks the seller's crazy and thinks the thing's overpriced. So you can't do that. You can't use that. It's like insider trading. That doesn't work. So designated dual agency only works when you've got more than one agent in the firm and they're separated from each other, not just by distance, but they just don't have a relationship really with one another. They're not sharing information about their clients in any meaningful way back and forth. I had a lady one time, she said she was the broker in charge, and she said, well, we do designated agency in my office, and there's only two of us. And I said, really? She said, yeah, we do designated dual agent. There's only two of us. And I said, that just seems crazy. I mean, it just seems like to me, an office with only two people, doesn't that seem weird to y'all? It'd be way too close for comfort if it was only two agents. And look, then she hit me with the big one. The other agent in her office was her husband.
Oh, right.
Oh, man.
And she said she and her husband were doing designated dual agency. I said, now wait a minute. There's no way. You have to know everything about your client, your husband and his clients, and I'm sure he knows everything about you. All she did to me was, honey, you don't know how our relationship works. And I was like, I'm leaving that alone. I ain't going to no further. I'm done with this discussion. But I mean, in theory, it only takes two agents. But I would say in practice, this is a big firm thing. This is for big firms. This is for firms that have, as an example, Seth is under my supervision. I'm his broker in charge. Leslie, my office manager and fellow instructor, is under my supervision. I'm her broker in charge. We would never practice designated dual agency in our firm, ever, because we're far too close to one another. There's not a single client that Leslie's working with that I don't know about at all times. And the same is true for me, because we're always in class, so we kind of need to know so we can cover each other's backs. If I have a transaction question and I'm in the middle of an 8-hour class, I need somebody who can pick up the slack. I need Seth to be aware of what's going on, or Leslie to be aware of what's going on. So there's no way we could ever have the separation necessary for designated dual agency. Does that make sense for everybody? But in a big firm, you certainly can. So here's the question a big should be asking those two agents. When Sarah and Deborah come to the broker in charge and say, here's the situation, we got these two clients and we want to do designated dual agency. Here's what the BIC should ask Sarah. Sarah, now I know the seller is your mother, so I know you're working with the seller. Do you know anything about the buyer that would hurt the buyer in this transaction? And what's her answer most likely going to be? Nope, I don't know anything about the buyer. Okay, good. Since you don't know anything that would hurt the buyer, I'm going to put you on the seller's team, and you're only on the seller's team. You don't owe the buyer anything now. The buyer's your customer, seller's your client. And then I'm going to have exactly the opposite discussion with Deborah. I'm going to say, Deborah, I know the buyer is the one you're working with. Do you know anything at all that would hurt the seller? And as long as she says no, then I'll put her on the buyer's team. And she's designated to represent the buyer and only the buyer. Does that make sense for everybody? That's designated dual agency. And then they're free to give all the advice they would normally give in any other transaction.
And you would only have one broker in charge, right? Or would you have two? Would you have
broker in charge?
Just one?
Has to be, remember, one firm.
One firm.
One per firm.
Yep.
How does that work? Is that not a conflict of interest if they're in the same firm and then he's having to go over like both sets of paperwork and making sure everything is right?
That is the one balancing act of designated dual agency. It does put the BIC under quite a bit of pressure because they may get questions from both sides of the transaction. And so the BIC is the one that has to be the most careful to not provide too much guidance one way or the other. But that's what the rule allows.
The BIC has to pretty much be like a mediator and say, like, I can't give you any advice
Correct.
because we're representing both.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what the BIC could do, let's say that there's a big dispute and they're having, a disagreement. Could the BIC come back and talk to two other agents in the firm, two that weren't involved in the transaction, and say, listen, I need some help. Can I designate you to go over there and help her on the buyer side, and I designate you to go help her on the seller side so y'all can help get this sorted out? Could we add people to the teams after the fact?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that might be one way to help resolve it or mediate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. The other thing is there's no rule that says, this is one of the things they like to trip you up with testing. It says here that the BIC can be a designated dual agent. Even the broker in charge. The broker in charge can designate themselves. I could say to myself, Travis, do you know anything that would hurt the buyer? No, good. Then I designate you to represent the seller. I could designate myself if I wanted to. I would never do that, but I could. Provisional brokers can be designated dual agents. Even two provisional brokers, one on each side, could be designated dual agents. Even a provisional on one side and a full broker on the other side, a non-provisional broker on the other side. That works. That's all left up to the broker in charge. The Real Estate Commission doesn't have any rule about that. There's only 2 times the Real Estate Commission says you can't do designated dual agency. The first is if one of the agents already has personal confidential information. If you already know personal confidential information, we can't put you on one of the teams. The second one that cannot happen is that a BIC cannot, I thought I had that on a slide, but I guess I don't. So I'll write it down. BIC can't.
Travis, I think it was at the bottom of the other sheet.
Yes, on the other slide. Yeah, there it is.
At the bottom.
Oh, okay. It's in one bullet point. Gotcha. But never opposite a broker in the same firm. There you go. It's in the same bullet point. So the BIC can be a designated dual agent, but they can't do it against a provisional. Why do you think that is? Who's the provisional?
The provisional cannot operate without the BIC.
The provisional is supposed to get all their information from the BIC, right? The provisional is supposed to get all their guidance from the BIC. Well, I can't work against them and guide them at the same time. So that's the only no-no. A provisional designated against their BIC. Now, let me tell you how they also like to trip you up on the test. They like to say, well, can two provisional brokers from the same firm be designated against each other? What's the answer?
Yes.
Yeah. How about 2 provisional brokers from 2 different firms? Can they be designated against each other?
Yes.
Yes.
It's not dual.
It's not designated dual agents.
not
They're
designated,
2
yeah.
different firms. That's co-brokerage. Dual agency and designated dual agency is how many firms?
1.
One firm. One firm. That's it. One firm. Erase my scribbles here since I had it on there. So designated dual agency, the simple concept is we got 2 individual agents in the same firm, one who brought the buyer, one who brought the seller. They know nothing about the other side, and so we're going to designate them. And we're going to say, you represent the seller, Sarah. Deborah, you represent the buyer, and you treat each other like you work at 2 different firms for the remainder of this transaction. You're working against each other. Have fun. Can they answer pretty much any question their clients have at that point?
Yes.
Can Deborah tell her best friend what she should offer on the property?
Yes.
Yeah. And can Sarah say, Mama, I don't think this is a fair offer. I think you should counter offer with this?
Yes.
Absolutely. Do you see why that is a huge improvement from the client's perspective? It gets
Yes.
them back much closer to what they thought they were going to get in the first place with exclusive agency. And that's why it's a really good solution to most of the cases of designated agency. Obviously, you have to make the buyer and the seller aware that we're in designated dual agency, because they need to know, don't contact the other person. Because remember, technically speaking, but when we started this, Sarah's mom hired the whole firm, right? So she could have technically talked to anybody at the firm before. But now there's somebody at the firm she shouldn't be talking to because they're working against her. So we have to make them aware of the fact that we're in designated dual agency. We have to get their permission for designated dual agency. And we have to make them aware of who they shouldn't be talking to. So Sarah should say, Mom, now, don't call the office and talk to just anybody. You need to only be talking to me. And especially don't talk to Deborah, because Deborah is representing the buyer now. And same conversation Deborah would have with her buyer client. Make everybody aware. It's still dual agency. Designated dual agency is a form, is a piece of dual agency, because dual agency is one firm representing both sides. And you got to get their opinion in advance. And that covers all 4 of the options for sales transactions. That brings us to the end of the options, not the end of the chapter, but the end of the options for sales transactions, and what are the choices available in sales transactions. And there are 4 of them. You've got exclusive agency, co-brokerage, dual agency, and designated dual agency. Those are the options that are available to any firm. Now, here's the other thing to remember, and I sometimes I think I forget to say this enough, but so I want to make sure I try to make it clear here. Just because those options are available does not mean the firm has to always offer all of those options. Firms are not required to always offer. If I hold an open house, first of all, if I'm holding an open house, who am I most likely there representing?
The seller.
I'm there representing the seller. Buyer comes in and they love the property. They have an interest in the property, and we ask them, well, are you working with an agent? They say, no, I've never worked with a real estate agent. At that point, we have a choice, do we not? Because here's what we know. We represent the seller. We have a buyer in front of us who has interest in the property. They don't have an agent. They're not working with a firm. We have a choice. Do we proceed with them by simply telling them we represent the seller and go like that? Or do we offer to represent them as well, in which case we would be doing some type of dual agency? Or do we refer them? Could we refer them to another firm if they wanted a buyer's agent? We could do that. We have options. And there's nothing that says we have to offer all the options. I've had people say, well, I don't like doing dual agency, but it's what the buyer wanted. Who cares? If you don't like doing it, don't offer it. I've had plenty of buyers that said to me at my listings, I had one a couple of years ago in Chapel Hill. I listed the head baseball coach at UNC's house for sale in Chapel Hill. And buyer called the night I put the sign up and wanted to see the property. And I said, well, that's fine. I'll be glad to come over and show it to you. But FYI, I represent the seller. So, if you want to have representation, you'd need to schedule it with your own agent. No, that's fine. We just want to see the property. So I went over there and I reminded him again before we went through the door. I represent the seller. I represent the seller and only the seller. So please don't tell me anything you wouldn't want the seller to know, and I can't give me any advice. That's fine. Well, then they loved it. They wanted to make an offer. And one of the first things they said was, well, can you represent us? What do you think my answer was?
No.
No, I already told you. I represent the seller. I can't represent you. I'm not going to represent you. Could I if I wanted to? Could we
Yes.
offer them dual agency?
Yes.
Sure. But I didn't want to because I didn't want to put myself in that situation. Here's the beauty of it. It says, so we can't make an offer? I said, of course you can make an offer. They said, well, do we have to get somebody to help us with that? I said, well, I'm happy to help you make an offer. Just understand, I can't tell you what the offer should be. I can't give you advice about the offer because I work for the seller. So, but you can fill the paperwork out for us? Of course I can. Can I do that as a seller's agent? Fill out paperwork so they can make an offer.
Yeah.
As long as I don't tell them what to put on there, right?
Right.
And so we went through the whole contract. I explained to them what an earnest money deposit was and a due diligence fee and sales price and closing date. And I went outside and I sat by the pool. I said, I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes. Y'all talk it over. You decide what you want to offer. When you're ready, you come get me and we'll write it up. And that's exactly what I did. Came back inside 15 minutes later. We wrote up the offer. I reminded them I represented the seller. Now, when I presented the offer to the seller, could I give the seller advice?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, because I'm only on one side. I'm only on one side of that transaction. And I'm very clear to the buyer that I'm only on one side. Very clean, easy. Nothing to hide here. Everybody with me on that? So you don't have to offer every option. Let's see what I got over here in the chat. Over here. Is it just me or does it seem like dual agency and exclusive agency both are horrible ideas because either way someone has a short end of the stick? Brittany, you want the world to be fair, don't you? There's that elementary school teacher coming out.
I'm sorry. I like for everybody to, get their equal shares or whatever. Be
well,
nice.
What I would say to you is I would agree with you on dual agency. I would personally disagree with you on exclusive agency because I think it very much case by case. Now, I will say this. Even as a listing agent, there have been buyers before where I've said to them, you need an agent. Like, clearly, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's going on. I'm trying to explain things to you here, but you need somebody to tell you what you should do here, and I can't be that person.
Yeah.
You need an agent. So I do think we have to weigh out the ethics of it, and when you find yourself in a situation where somebody truly needs that. But I will tell you, what you'll experience in the real world will be a lot of buyers who sign up for dual agency really weren't interested in representation at all. What they were interested in, they just wanted to get an offer submitted. They were willing to sign whatever piece of paperwork somebody put in front of them so they could submit an offer because they wanted to get involved. And
I mean, I get it that it's, at the end of the day, it is about the money and about the value and everything. But at the same time, like, if it was me, for example, I wouldn't feel comfortable if I'm not, if I'm like short ending someone, if that makes sense.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
I don't feel ethical, like it's ethically appropriate to do that.
That's the beauty of it. We all get to make those decisions about what we're comfortable with ultimately, and then that translates to what we offer to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, I guess in the scheme of things, it's technically up to us unless
your firm has an absolute policy.
Firm.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly right. I mean, like some firms have a policy of no dual agency. Some firms have a policy of no designated dual agency. Some have a policy of we don't do true dual agency, but we do designate. I mean, your firm could have whatever policy it wants too. And then the individual brokers get to make that decision for themselves as well.
Okay.
Could you have an alliance with somebody outside your agency if you work with an agency that doesn't like dual? So you could always just go to that buddy and say.
Absolutely, and that's actually what I've done. Sheila, that's a good point. That's actually what I've done over the years. So I have a really good friend, co-instructor. She teaches pre-licensing for us sometimes too. Super smart, and she's affiliated with Keller Williams. So we're in two different firms, but we both respect each other. We both know how good we are at the job. And we just have sort of a standing agreement with each other that if we are in a situation at one of our own listings and a buyer comes along that's unrepresented and we feel like they really need representation, I just automatically refer it to Michelle, and she does the same thing with me. I'll pick up the phone and I'll call her and I'll say, Michelle, I got one over here at this listing. They need you. And she will contact them and see if they would like representation. And then I will work out, we have a pre-arranged referral fee between the two of us, and that works great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Brittany says, so would you have two brokers in charge for dual agency, one for the seller team, one for the buyer team? No. And you keep, Brittany, you keep bringing up that question.
You already answered.
Okay. All right,
like I put it in there, and then I was like,
okay.
looking at
I thought maybe you were repeating it since I had answered. I was like,
no, because I said like you weren't looking at it, so I was like,
gotcha,
I'll just ask it.
I appreciate it. I was like, no, one firm, one location, one BIC. You might have more than one person within the firm who has BIC eligibility, who could be a BIC, but at any given time, there's only one broker in charge of the firm.
Gotcha.
I was confused about that because I remember we had a conversation last week about it, saying I took it as there could be multiple BICs at one time, because you're like, if you only have one and then that person gets sick or whatever, it's not like the whole firm can shut down.
That's right. And so you have
eligibility.
Right. There's a difference between being the BIC currently and having BIC eligibility. You know, like as an example, Leslie in my firm is BIC eligible. She's taken the BIC class. She takes the CE every year. So if something were to happen to me and she needed to slide into that role, it would be instant. You just send in a piece of paper and it says, now Leslie's the BIC, and the firm would never miss a beat.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But at any single time, it's just one. There's always somebody at the top.
Okay. No matter how big the firm is.
No matter how big the firm is. And the reason for that is that's the way the real estate commission wants it. They want one point of contact when there's a problem within that firm. That's who they're going to. They're going straight to the broker in charge. Whether there's 5 people there or 500 people, they're going to the broker in charge, because they're going to say, we want your records of this transaction for this person and this, they want 1 point.
Right.
All right. I think that is a wonderful stopping point for today. Tomorrow we will finish up chapter 7. So you don't even have a quiz yet for tonight. Isn't that wonderful? You don't even have one yet tonight. You will tomorrow, and certainly will on Wednesday. But we will finish up chapter 7 and start chapter 8 tomorrow. I would suggest you go ahead and have a calculator ready for tomorrow as well. I'm not sure if we will get to the math in chapter 8, but we may. That should be math, by the way, that you should absolutely enjoy doing, because it's commission math. And so that's the kind of math you want to do, figure out how much you're going to get paid. That's a good thing. So we'll finish chapter 7 tomorrow, and then we will start on chapter 8 and finish chapter 8 on Wednesday, as well as do some license law stuff. So it was a good, productive day. Y'all did well. Hopefully your brains didn't melt too much. Agency is a big topic. It's a lot. It takes a lot to get through it. So go decompress, and I will see you in the morning.
Sounds good. Bye.
Does anybody have the note that was on slide 42 under the basic concept?
The note? Let me back up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I erased it because it was on the previous slide. That's the one I was writing the note, and they started yelling at me. They're mean around here. No, I was going to say the BIC can't be designated against a provisional broker, but it's actually on the previous slide at the end of that.